I said a few weeks ago on this show, before the news broke that Assange would walk free, that he's a figure that divides conservative politics. Now, we've had a bit of rigorous debate playing out amongst our writers in the Flat White section. That will continue over the weekend, so keep an eye out. And on Wednesday, we invited libertarian John Ruddock onto the show to speak in favour of Assange and defend the idea of freedom of the press, even if that means bending or breaking the law to reveal alleged crimes committed by the regime. Well, today we invite Double Shot creator and Spectator writer Terry Barnes on to explore the other side of Assange. Terry, welcome to the show.
Hello, Alexandra.
Well, for the purposes of context, my personal views on Assange lean heavily toward the libertarian edge, though perhaps not as far as Ross Cameron or John Ruddock, but certainly sitting near them. Now, Terry, let's start with some fire. Fellow Spectator authors Gabriel Moens and Augusto Zimmermann penned a rebuttal to your article on Julian Assange. They write, and I quote, "Following Assange's return to Australia, Terry Barnes, in a brutal article in this publication, lambasted Assange's release from prison, in which he refers to him as a convicted spy. In support of his view, he quotes frontbench opposition MP Jane Hume, who demonised Assange for recklessly releasing information that put counterintelligence and intelligence communities at risk. In short, Barnes is clearly of the view that Assange is a disgrace to Australia and a convicted felon." Now, Terry, they counter by saying commentators don't really seem to understand the danger that governments pose without freedom of speech. What are your thoughts, Terry?
This sort of deep state rubbish that people like to throw into the debate when they don't really have anything valid to say. I think that's, look, they're entitled to their point of view, but frankly, I think Julian Assange is nothing more than a glorified computer hacker, a data hacker who basically enjoyed hacking the data. I don't think he really cared. I don't think he really cared about the consequences of himself doing that, the consequences of WikiLeaks doing that, the fact that these mass data dumps were done in such a way that was reckless to the safety of serving personnel in Afghanistan and Iraq, dangerous to the national interests of countries, including Australia, and certainly dangerous to the lives and safety of those people who were prepared to work with our forces in those theatres, be informants, be eyes on the ground, by naming them or actually not having their names redacted from documents. I think it was dangerous, it was reckless, and it was foolish, and it was stupid. And Mr. Assange had no sense of responsibility for that. He still has no sense of responsibility for that. And people like Professor Zimmermann and
Gabriel Moens?
Yes, him. I mean, look, they're entitled to kick me, but look, I thought my comments about Julian Assange in that article, which was published in the UK Spectator and republished in the US Spectator, were quite mild compared to something I saw on Flat White by Michael DePercy and Sasha Dov-Buckman, who really outlined chapter and verse why Julian Assange should not be lionised, why he should not be treated as a hero, why he should not be given the bells and whistles reception that Mr. Albanese as Prime Minister has given him, the first man on the phone when he hit the ground indeed. I mean, that's contemptible. I mean, Mr. Assange is contemptible, the Prime Minister is contemptible in championing him.
Well, their argument, as well as mine, I guess, pivots on the danger of a state that knows its secrets will never become public. Now, Terry, we've got a long tradition of declassifying military secrets in the West, and that is for the express purpose of making sure that governments are aware citizens will eventually read their dirtiest secrets and behaviours. It keeps them honest in the present. And so transparency is a fundamental form of citizen protection, which is lacking in places like China that have no such idea. Now, the argument is not whether Assange broke the law. As far as I understand it, it's whether or not breaking the law was warranted in this particular case to expose things that governments should not have been doing. Now, to me, I view it in a similar frame, obviously not exactly, but similar, to those who broke their confidentiality clauses with Big Tobacco to reveal public harm. Was it illegal? Sure. Was it in the public interest? I would argue yes. Is there an argument here, Terry?
Well, certainly I think you and I are not qualified to actually run that argument, Alexandra, because we have never served in war, have we? I mean, you haven't, I haven't. We don't know what it's like to be on the ground. We don't know what it's like to make judgments in the field. And that's effectively the incident that WikiLeaks got the most glory from in relation to that US helicopter strike on Iraqi civilians. I think we weren't there. We weren't in the shoes of those military people, and certainly I think it's easy for us, this situation, this setting, to have a debate about these principles, but we have to look at about how it plays out in the real world, and certainly I think governments and military organisations, armies, air forces, and so on, have every right and have a duty, I think, to keep their operations as secret as they possibly can to, one, ensure success, but two, to minimise the loss of life, the loss of property, and certainly the maintaining their forces in an operable state. Now, I thought it was ironic, as I pointed out in my Spectator article, that Mr. Assange was basically given his freedom on the island of Saipan in the Pacific because in 1944, I mean, it was actually the subject of a massive assault by US forces, an assault that cost tens of thousands of lives. And if those forces were compromised in the way that WikiLeaks and its data dumps compromised modern forces in the 2010s, that loss of life could have been hugely greater. And that's the whole thing. It's about protecting. It's about protecting people on the ground. It's about protecting the national interest. And certainly we don't want governments to abuse their rights to conduct operations in secrecy, but we don't assume, surely we don't assume that this deep state is everywhere, pervasive. I don't agree with that. I think sometimes that the interests of national security, the interests of the security of the people, as well as those on the ground defending our freedoms, needs to be protected. And I think Mr. Assange was in reckless disregard of that. I think he was actually a shameful disgrace.
Well, I actually want to talk to you about that point about the Japanese island. Reading your article, it seems as if you're implying that Assange has no respect for military secrets as a general concept by using that example. I would contest that. I don't think Assange would release secrets of that nature in the context of, for example, conquering the Japanese and reclaiming that island. And I think one of the first questions that journalists should actually ask Assange, so we have it from his lips, is whether or not he differentiates between the types of secrets he would consider releasing and if there would be a line there. But your article, when we talk about the indiscriminate release of secrets, do you really believe that Assange, for example, would have tipped off the Germans about D-Day, or do you think that his intentions were to do good with what he released?
I think his intentions were to maximise attention for himself, to maximise attention for WikiLeaks, to give, as I said before, I think he's a glorified data hacker. He's a computer hacker. It was the thrill of the chase for him, as far as I could see. It wasn't the question about national interest. It wasn't interest about protecting the security of forces on the ground. It wasn't. It was all dressed up in this libertarian cloak of decency, which I don't think he actually had a clue about. I don't think he actually cared about that. Yes, look, hundreds of thousands of documents were put out there. There was a lot to trawl through. Other people did trawl through them. I don't think he was a journalist in the way that some people are describing him. I think he was providing, and I think illegally and inappropriately and totally irresponsibly, the data and documents to access, but he didn't show any responsibility. And as far as I can see, he didn't show any ethics in the way that he obtained them and the way that he used them.
Well, one follow-up question just before we go, Terry. If you became aware that your government was engaging in something that was illegal and in danger, even though it was a military secret, would you keep that secret or would you become a WikiLeaks whistleblower?
I think I would actually, because as a conservative, I believe in the rule of law. I would follow the law as it stands, and certainly I would not break the law or not seek to break the law. If I had the capacity to raise it, I would raise it. But to go and be a whistleblower, I think whistleblowers are overblown in so many cases, and I think this particular whistleblower is contemptible, frankly.
Interesting point. I'm sure we'll have more conversations about this one in the future because Assange has not given any interviews yet. So we haven't heard, we don't even know if he's allowed to give interviews as per his plea deal, but we will see. But look, thank you for
Well, there's also proceeds of crime legislation, Alexandra, which would stop him profiting, as far as I can read the law, stop him profiting from his now convicted activities.
Doesn't mean he can't publish if he doesn't take any money for it. But we will see. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of follow-up questions about his intentions now that he is here in Australia. But look, thank you for your article. I'm going to enjoy the weekend of robust conversation between our flat white writers, and we'll see where it lands. But thank you for joining us here today, Terry.
I'd like to say it was a pleasure. So it was robust. Thank you very much.
No worries. All right.